I also would like to introduce our first innovation area. Bettina already mentioned that there are several parts who really play a significant role when we are talking about impact, and one of them is agriculture and technology. So within the next hours, we have different talks and panels coming up. We are talking about regenerative companies who can help solve the climate crisis. We're going to talk about alternative proteins, or we even talk about soil regeneration. But really right now, we have a different guest on stage. He is, of course, also in the agriculture technology business, and that's Jakob Bussmann, CEO and founder of Seed Forward, and whose mission is to make plants more adaptable. Welcome, Jakob.
Hi. What's the biggest danger for humanity? Is it super robots and AI? Coal power plants? Or asteroids crushing our planets, like in the mainstream media a few weeks ago? Or is it farting cows? In the mainstream media, many topics are portrayed black and white, at least if you believe this is our biggest problem. Looking at the challenges that we have, these kind of myths are really dangerous they are blocking us from moving forward into an economy of the future and into a sustainable future. So I brought you 3 myths today, which have to be debunked, and those are just a small example in order to continue to implement new farming practices, to work on that. And many farmers around the world, when we started in South Africa in 2015, told us, soil is just dirt. It's just a dead media or substrate for roots to grow in. And seeds, fertilizers, and plant protection is just applied to generate the perfect plant. But this is a really dangerous assumption. Why is that? Soil is the key. If you look at human health, we discovered in the last decades that our microbiome plays a vital role in our health, in our nutrition. Basically, the small little microbes in us are feeding us and saving us. And the soil is the same thing. If we grow in a dead soil, we won't get far. To make it visual, if you imagine to be in a hospital and you're basically just kept alive by a respirator and nutrient injections, that's pretty much the same as most of the farming systems we live in today. The second myth I brought you today is that planting trees will save us. Don't get me wrong, I studied forest sciences back in the days, and I love forests. But this is a very visual and very emotional discussion, so trees are of course great, but are they really delivering the biggest lever to change the carbon sequestration and really turn around for a 1.5 degree target? And I want to open your eyes for the way of thinking for bioeconomy. So looking at, imagine there's nothing growing on the soil, but this is a status quo. A normal forest soil without trees on it, that will store around 360 tons CO2 per year. A permanent green grassland is storing around half. A farm soil is storing around half with 95 tons CO2. That's just without anything growing on it, status quo in Germany approximately. With wood on top of it, you see on the left side, there's around 650 tons in the forest. If you now look at what's growing on it, a typical forest is storing around 8 to 9 tons carbon per year, annual growth rate. A grassland is storing around 50 to 60 tons per year, annual growth rate. And the farmland with, for example, corn or maize on it is storing around 30 tons per year. Of course, you could say now, if we burn that, if we feed it, and everything is going back into the atmosphere, yes, then it's not really helping us, but there's a huge potential in it if we think of it in a bioeconomy way. So, for example, we produce fibers. We use pyrolysis technology to capture the carbon of the biomass in a permanent form. And at that point, we're getting to a situation where actually the farmland and grassland has more potential to capture carbon than the forest as a leverage point. I still believe that we should plant trees. The third myth I brought you is that conventional farming will feed the world and will save us, because that's what you actually read a lot, and organic farming is not able to do that. And the paradigm of the last decades actually showed us that using the old paradigm of farming practices degraded most of the soils. FAO is stating that we only have 60 harvests left on industrial use soils. That might be a little bit extreme. We can still turn that around. But carbon has been set free, and humus has been degraded, and biodiversity has been lost, and that's all parts of the current way of doing farming. And guess what? It's not only about farming. In the current paradigm, everybody is saying to feed the 9 billion, we need to produce more. We need to produce more on less land surface and so on. But actually, if we look at this topic, and everybody of you heard it, but it's a main lever for impact in this food supply chain, we're losing around 30% of food worldwide annually. In countries of the global south, it's actually up to 50% due to post-harvest losses. So at this point already, if we would tackle this topic properly, we would have abundance in the food chain. So there's enough food for everyone. And looking at the topic that I'm working on and I'm passionate about is regenerative agriculture. It's basically trying to combine food production or resource production in land use models with that sustainability and food security approach. So regenerative agriculture, in short, is trying everything focused on the soil to close carbon cycles, to close nutrient cycles, to close water cycles, and to create maximum biodiversity on a piece of land. So regenerate soils in order to create abundance in the system. And this is already proven. There's many showcases that actually show that on a hectare regeneratively farmed, even economically, for a farmer, you can earn way more than on a hectare of typical conventional farming in corn, for example. So why do we need to debunk these myths and create transparency in this area? Because as long as we're discussing these main phrases like cows are the danger for humanity, we won't be able to actually look into the future and to move in a positive direction. But we need to create the dialogue in order to actually put things on the road, or as we say in Germany, get the horsepower on the street. And this can be done beautifully with these small examples I just gave you. And there's many, many, many best practice examples, showcase projects around the globe. A lot of committed farmers that are actually already switching from conventional farming to Regen Ag. But we need to connect them and we need to scale their solution. But what's holding us back at this point? And there's, in my view, only a small example, but there's three things in general. One is measurability. So environmental processes are very complex, farming systems are very complex. And if I want to measure the impact, for example, what a different seed variety or a different fertilizer or a different agroforestry system has on the soil and the ecosystem over 10 or 20 or 50 years, I need to create data. And we've been lacking the right sensors, we have been lacking the right long-term studies on it, so there's little data on some of the topics, but for example in the current system, a chamber of agriculture won't be able to recommend these practices if they don't have the data. So we need to create data, that's really important. The second part of it is that we actually, and that's actually one of the most important parts, it's directed to investors and to financing strategies, because if I want to reap the benefits of a regenerative agriculture, and I want to have a diverse system for humanity, and I want to have food security, then I need to invest into the soil now, today, not in 10 years. But most of the farmers are limited in their financial capacity and in their working power on the farm, so they don't have the money to actually invest into the soil because it's expensive. You need to put in carbon, you need to put in compost, you need to have time to implement, you need to plant trees. All of that is only possible if we create financing models that are able to tackle this upfront investment challenge. And yeah, those are actually the main points that are holding us back from our view. And to get to my heart in this, I believe that all of you, we are here to create an impact, and be it in our families, in our business, in society, in environment, but probably most importantly, family. We always talk about enkelfähige Landwirtschaft, so agriculture for our nephews. And basically, in our view, the challenges are clear, and we just have to get going. So please connect and reach out, and let's get this started.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Are you ready? So you just heard the importance of soil for our whole ecosystem, and that it's really essential for agriculture production to take it serious, to invest in a good soil fertility, because it's actually the fundament of our earth, of our food, and what we are living on. So our next expert panel is also about soil, and it's basically about the question of how soil affects the carbon cycle and if we can even close it. And therefore, I'm welcoming our next panelist. I can see her over there. She's coming in a bit. Her name is Azadeh Farajpour, and she is the founder of Better Soil for a Better World. It's an initiative, and together with other industry experts, she will dig deeper in the importance of soil, and also, as I said in the beginning, how we can maybe close the carbon cycle with it. I already welcome you on stage. We are almost done. Please share an applause with her. Azadeh Farajpour. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. So the stage is yours. I gave the mic over to you. You already have one.
Yes, thank you.
But we're curious to know your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. I hope you had a good yesterday, could get some talks, some interesting chats. And yes, so let's start the panel. I would welcome Professor Dr. Thomas Scholten. He is professor at University of Tübingen, professor for soil sciences and geomorphology. Please give him an applause. Why did you study geomorphology and soil sciences? You told us because you love digging into the dirt.
Yes, from the very first years on, I really loved to play with soil as a little child, and since then it doesn't left me anymore, and I decided to make it my profession as well. So, and I'm still very happy with it.
Thank you very much. Please have a seat. I would welcome Professor Dr. Estelle Herlyn. She is a professor at University. She works on the connection between economic development and climate change, and how to realistically achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Please have a seat. Last but not least, Dr. Andrea Licata. He is the founder of Talent Eco GmbH 2017. You come from science went to private sector and bring green startups and investors together.
Thank you very much.
So please have a seat.
Here?
Yes. Okay, so I would start the panel with you, Thomas, because you are the professor for soil sciences. Professor Dr. Schellenhuber yesterday talked about negative emissions, talked about climate change, the role of soil. On one of his slides, he showed us the role of soil. Can you explain the role of soil in climate change? What does that mean when we talk about soil and climate change?
First of all, you have to realize that together with the water and air, soil is one of the bases of our life. About 90% of the food we need and we have is produced on soils. And also soils store a lot of water. 1 square meter can store about 200 liters or more of a good soil. And if you imagine that the Frankfurt area, for example, has about 600 liters of rain per year, then it becomes clear that if the soil alone can store 200, 1/3 of that, that this is a great deal, especially during dry or drought periods. Further, the soil stores carbon. You already know that. We have seen some numbers from the first speaker here. It stores about 4 times as much carbon as we have in the whole atmosphere, or 8 times as much carbon as our forests can store. So it has a very important role also in storing or sequestering, that is how we call it, carbon in soils. There are many other functions like biodiversity and so on that soils can care for. But today our soils are threatened by overuse, by our behavior, and we assume that about 1/3 of the soils is already heavily degraded worldwide by soil erosion, by compaction, using heavy machinery, but also by other threats like soil salinity or soil pollution by heavy metals or by any other many other organic compounds. Another third of our soils is still in a phase of being degraded but still functioning. But the situation is hot. We have to try to save our soils, and also we can use that as a win-win situation to help with the climate crisis. Because soils, as I already said, store a lot of carbon, and if we improve that function of a soil, probably by agriculture, we saw some very interesting examples just, by a new way of agriculture, then we have these win-win situations. We help the soil to become good quality to soil, or those who are still okay to keep them as that, and we can reduce the amount of CO2 that is going into the atmosphere.
You talk about binding carbon in the soil, soil regeneration to close carbon cycles. So what mechanism, what methods shall be implemented underground to bind carbon dioxide in the soil, and how high is the potential?
Each soil has a specific capacity to store carbon. It depends on many factors. I don't want to go into detail too much, but each soil has a specific, let's say, level or equilibrium of carbon content. When we use it for agriculture, we take out the plants, we harvest. That means that we take out carbon that potentially could be stored in the soil. If we now change the way we manage our soils in a way that we level up the amount of carbon that can be stored in the soil by changes in the way we manage agriculture, then we can sequester carbon into the soil. You might know this 4 promille initiative that comes from France some years ago, and this 4 promille was just the amount. If we store 4 promille of carbon into the soil every year, this is equal to the amount of carbon that we emit every year. So that is a very interesting concept. To use soil to sequester carbon. Okay. Of course, it doesn't work everywhere in the same amount, and also it's a kind of a capacity that is filled at a certain point, so it's not the only measure. Of course, there has to be a wide range of different measures to reduce our carbon footprint.
Is there a potential damage? Because our oceans are already sequestering a huge amount of carbon, but the price is that they are getting more sour. Acidification is happening in the oceans. Is this also the case in the soils when they remove a huge amount of carbon and bind it in themselves?
When the soil sequesters carbon, or the humus content, how we call it, is increased, this is good, because it increases also the soil quality and the soil fertility.
Okay, so it does not have anything with the souring.
Yeah.
Okay, Estelle, on the global scale, we have 2 global projects: Sustainable Development Goals to make a world a better place for all, and limiting the Earth warming to 1.5 or 2 degrees, Paris Agreement. You described a systemic challenge in your last book within the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. What is it? What does that mean, that the goals can have conflicts?
Okay, so my task now is to draw the big picture, which unfortunately is very often forgotten in all the detailed discussions that we are having. So at the end, the Sustainable Development Goals are a complex system of goals that have to be achieved globally. Not in Germany, but globally. And now, what is it in essence? I think we have 17 goals. In essence, it's about 2 topics that should be achieved together. And we have, on the one hand, economic development. And it is about creating jobs, it's about overcoming poverty. At the end, it's about fulfilling the basic needs for everybody worldwide. And this is the part of the discussion that is very often forgotten in Germany when we are talking about sustainability. And we only have to think about the German Wahlkampf. Then we come to what is very, very present in Germany, and this is the whole environmental and climate protection issue, which is, of course, so from a German perspective, what is the most present in our minds. And of course, it also comes to biodiversity, which is very, very important. The issue is that these 2 goals, by the way, the first one brought in 1972 by Indira Gandhi, so from a Indian politician, and now 50 years later, or next year it will be 50 years, we still have the same issues still unsolved. Why? Because I think this is very conflicting goals. No? And this is the reason why we are struggling. I think why we do not have the solutions in place. Because we see that we have economic development at the end, GDP, and, for example, CO2 emission very correlated. No? And the big question still unsolved is, how do we stop this correlation? This is one issue. And also to bring one more point why this is all very difficult is that we have huge financing gaps. And we are talking about trillions of dollars. So since this is here an impact festival, at the end we need a lot of impact investing. Yeah? We need all the money if we want to have a chance to really implement the Agenda 2030 by 2030. Yeah? And we only have 9 years left.
Do you think that the soils can be the solution to close the gap or to narrow the gap, a financial gap, or to be a solution to achieve sustainable development goals?
Yeah, so absolutely they can. I think to be realistic, and I like to be realistic, it's not the only solution, but it is an essential part of the solution. So I think we could, just one sentence beside, we definitely have to talk about the energy system, which is not our topic today, but then one other very important part of the solutions are the nature-based solutions in general. And of course, the soils are one part of it, and a very important part which is neglected today. I think we have started to talk a lot about forests, reforestation, protection, and so on, and the soils is, I think, what is somehow neglected, unfortunately. Why? And I think I come back to what you already said. On the one hand, we have the soils capturing CO2 if they are healthy, and you are the expert of this topic. On the other hand, we go into the field of agriculture. And what is agriculture? It's a field of value creation. It's a field where we can create jobs, It's a field where we can overcome poverty, and this is the case for the world. It's not Germany, it's really the world. It's the developing countries, and this is why there is such a huge potential which is not unlocked.
You talk about money, financial gap. Andrea,
Yep.
you work with investors, you work with startups, you work with people with financial resources, with the ability to invest somewhere. How can we close the gap? How can we bring money more to achieve sustainable development goals, or to the soils that they can make a solution or contribute as a solution to fulfill the sustainable development goals on the global scale?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for the invitation. Of course, this is my opinion, what I'm going to say. So the climate change situation is not getting better. Even yesterday, the UN Secretary, General Secretary, said that we are far from the Paris Agreement. And by the way, will be the Paris Agreement enough? So the situation is not good from this point of view. But also because of this, we will see more and more investments in favor of the green innovation and the green economy. So you see Impact Festival, my company is proud partner of this great event, with 8 innovation areas, because all the economy will have to change. So it's all important. It's not that agriculture must change, but then so that the oil company can go on. So, I mean, the global goals, the climate goals will not be easy to reach. And so a lot of efforts will be necessary. But European Green Deal, for the first time, enormous investment in the US, trillions, millions of green jobs expected. We see the crowdfunding campaigns of the green startups going very well, better and better. There are startups raising millions, tens of millions with crowd investment campaigns. All these, let's say, examples make me very optimistic from this point of view. So I see this situation, climate change getting worse, and as a reaction, more and more investment in favor of the green economy. It will be necessary, of course, to stop pollution, to stop the polluters, because this is a big part of the problem. So we are facing an enormous transformation, and from this point of view, I'm very optimistic. I'm partner of this event, but I also organize other events, and as you said, I'm in touch with many investors, many startups, so this is my feeling. The green economy will grow, and we expect a lot of, we expect millions of green jobs. So
yeah, I'm happy that you're optimistic,
yeah.
optimistic about this, but the problem is that we lose every year 10 million hectares of good soil, every year. It's about 14 million Fußball field. Thomas, what is the problem? So if the science is there and says that, hey, this is the way to improve the soil fertility, and the other side, the world population is growing. Sooner, 10 billion people on the planet. Losing soils, 10 million hectares per year. What does that mean? What is the problem here when he says about the positive examples?
Maybe 2 aspects. One is the aspect that we do not value soil. You see, we have lost the contact to soil. Most of you have never had soil in their hand, or most of you do not feel happy when their hands get dirty. That was completely different 100 years ago. So we have to learn and accept the value of soil, and then we have a starting point to change our behavior. And the second aspect is maybe from the SDGs coming, we have to bring that down to the farmer and to the individual. There are other needs in their fields. They need to create income, things like that. So they need incentives, or they need a motivation, which is mostly money, to do things that sequester carbon into the soil. So this is a really, really big story. Politics have to help, industries have to help, and also myself as a scientist can help here and describe things or evaluate. ideas whether this would be something that secures healthy soils and even can help to reduce the degradation of soils. Also, one aspect we have here in Germany and in many countries in the Western world is that we seal soils every day. We have 70 hectares that we seal with roads and with houses and things like that. So also these things play into this story. So building big houses where 2 people live in 200 square meter flats or have a big green around is not what we should continue in the near future. We have to find solutions. Also in the traffic sector, we have to find solutions that we do not need so much area and seal it. And the other world is the global south, where the problems are much different. There's not sealing the problem, there's the problem to have enough food, to have healthy food for the family. So it's a very, very, how to say, complex situation, and I'm very happy that all you are here and so many new endeavors are here to try to combine that with...
We try to raise awareness for soils.
Combine that with the industry or with the commercial issues. I'm quite convinced that this is the only way to solve the problem.
But not just here. Estelle, you have worked 10 years in private sector. Every second company in Germany wants to become climate neutral in the near future, every second. And every fourth of companies who knows about sustainable development goals in Germany gives sustainable development goals a very high priority and importance. Can soils be the bridge between climate neutrality and fulfilling the SDGs in the private sector for these companies?
So obviously it can, yes it can. It can be a bridge, not the only bridge, but a very important bridge. This is what I would say, and now the question is why. So you just mentioned that a lot of companies really want to become climate neutral. Some even are climate neutral today, and also really huge industrial companies like Bosch. They are climate neutral, really also applying offsetting, so taking money and investing or putting this money into projects in the global south to bind CO2 in nature-based solutions. So this is the way to go. So, and why is this really a huge chance? Because at the end, the CO2 is the lever to bring the money into all these processes. And the general idea is really to let the emitters of CO2, so us here in the room, the companies in the global north, maybe also some, of course, in the global south. We also have millionaires in the global south, but all these CO2 emitters paying the ones who are getting the CO2 out of the atmosphere. And this is the way to bring the money into agricultural activities around the world. So now, what can be the idea behind? So what the companies are doing? Some of them, this is what I mentioned, they are offsetting to become climate neutral. This is one way to bring the money into these processes. Then we also have what is discussed recently and what is really becoming more emphasis is paid ecosystem services. So what are the companies doing? I think they are using natural capital. Yeah, they need resources, so they use natural capital, and at the end they have to make sure that in another place we have to recreate natural capital, and this is the way of thinking there. So it's paid ecosystem services. And then I think, which is probably the topic for a lot of you here in the room, we have these impact investing activities where we want to create impact with our money. So then we can ask, what kind of impact are we talking about? And it, of course, or it should be impact towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I already said, the soils and the other nature-based solutions, what is really so wonderful about them is that they make it possible to positively have an impact on a lot of Sustainable Development Goals that I think by our experience are contradictory. So we have the positive impact on climate action, SDG 13, but also on overcoming poverty and hunger. It's about creating jobs, it's about protecting biodiversity, and this is, so in German, viele Fliegen mit einer Klappe schlagen. Yeah? Some will understand that, and I think a lot of people are not aware about this, not at all, and again, the German Wahlkampf, not any sentence about it.
Okay, Andrea,
Yep.
About your company. You work with the next generation, with the Green Ops young people who wants to move towards sustainability.
Yep.
How can these people who are sitting at the salon at the moment or outside close the gap and bring more attention to soils?
Yeah.
To close the gap that we do not lose soils anymore,
Yeah.
and then regenerate it? How can green startups contribute to that?
Well, I agree. For example, with the professor, the situation is very complex, so a direct answer could be with events like this one, because, for example, you also were mentioning raising awareness. I must admit that there is not a lot of information going on in the startup scene about soil, so there is probably a lot to do and a lot of potential. And so my answer is going on like this, organizing events, connection, university and startups, connection, climate scientists and startups. For example, in the afternoon, it was me to propose a speaker from the World Meteorological Organization talking about climate change, because we will always have to be updated and follow the climate crisis that maybe will get worse, and so we will have to adapt our plans. So my answer is...
do you see a chance?
Yes, I see. Of course, there is an enormous potential. I expect a big change. The climate movement will grow and probably reach hundreds of millions of people. Everything will be very different and quickly. So this is what I expect. My suggestion is to go on like this with the connection science and innovation. And yeah, I agree with you that anyway there is not a lot of information, or maybe the startup scene, the event organizer have to be more open to this topic.
So, yeah. Thomas, what would be your message to these people, to investors, to people with financial resources, that they do something for the common good, which is soil at the moment? What would be your message as a scientist?
Go to your garden, take a spade, and start digging into the soil. Get a feeling
digging into the dirt
for what is there. That would be my first advice.
That's why you studied soil sciences.
Sorry, one contribution. I have done that in Ostfriesland. Sorry, really, this soil, which is very full of humus, is totally different than other soil. I know it by experience, so I can confirm that.
Estelle, how would you like to draw the future? What does the future look like to you?
My future?
Yes.
Realistically, or what I hope? That's very, very different. My hope. Okay, so then I will concentrate on my hope. So I hope that everything that we are talking, or that we have been talking about here, becomes a much broader awareness in society. And society means, on the one hand, the private sector, because this sector will have to close the financing gap. So for sure, politics will not solve these huge issues that we have in the financing dimension of the point. Then I also hope that politics becomes or gets a broader view on what the challenge is that we have to solve in the field of climate protection. So I think Germany is not the only country actually that has a very narrow view on what we have to do in the field of climate action. I think this is very limited to what can we do within Germany, completely losing the focus, completely forgetting where are the big levers that we have to find and where we have to do something. Then it comes to, we have to bring the money outside, we have to invest the money not inside Germany. Of course we also have German issues within the German soil and all that, definitely yes. But if we want to have a chance solving this humankind challenge of sustainability, we have to invest the money in the global south. Yeah. And to get the understanding, I think then you really need a systemic view on what we are talking about. If you don't have that, you will never ever understand and never do the right thing.
Andrea, your last message to the green startups out there.
But, well, honestly, I'm very happy, let me say, because I have been working together with the team of Impact Festival for this event. I'm very happy of this event. I mean, it was obviously not easy because of COVID, but I'm meeting a lot of startups. Later, Ecosia will talk.
Are you going to be an ambassador for soils, for better soils?
No, well, yes, I'm very interested, of course, because at the end there are no many options, and so I see personally a huge potential about soil. I like reading a lot. I used to cooperate with the university in the past, so I'm very happy of reading more and more articles about soil, and why not to cooperate to new events like this one and bring my network. As Estelle said, Impact Investors, Impact is the name of this festival, will be more and more. And yeah, so again, I would like to close with a positive message. So this event, I see like a good beginning. The next will be bigger, and so this panel, according to me, was a very good idea. And I also have to learn a lot, so I feel lucky that there are here two professors, and I can learn about soil.
Yeah, thank you very much to you all for the how do you call it, encourages talk. Soils are important. People, give your attention to soils, make your soils better, whether you are in garden or you are in a small farm or a big farm. Go for your soils. This is the bridge between climate neutrality, one of the solutions, and fulfilling the sustainable development goals. Thank you to you all, and yes, have a good rest of the day. Dankeschön.
Thank you very much to our panel. So I'll take that message that soil is important. Also, proteins are important, and this is going to be the topic of our next keynote in the next part. So thanks again. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Carsten Gerhardt. Carsten, he's a partner at Köhn in the chemical practice. And Carsten, you will talk about alternative proteins as new sources to feed 10 billion people that will be on the planet by the mid of the century. I'm very curious about the topic. I would say if you're ready, please come on stage. Warm welcome. And the stage is all yours. Thank you, Carsten.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. This week I was at a dinner reception, and it was a very nice 3-course meal. And at the end, when everybody was settled, there came the commentary, how come there was meat in every course of this dinner? So, and obviously that is a discussion that we keep hearing again and again, but there is alternatives. And what I would like to talk about is alternative proteins, and the title is Sources to Feed 10 billion. Well, 10 billion is what we ultimately will have on this planet. And the fortunate thing is that there is lots of opportunities, and I would like to firstly sketch out what are the alternatives to conventional meat, and then give something of a prognosis on how we at Köhn see that developing towards 2040. Very briefly, in time of summarizing the challenges, so everybody is talking about that increase, 20–30% of more people. At the same time, we have very much shrinking availability of land. We have water scarcity. We have exhaust greenhouse gas. And we have been hearing about the farting cows. So very often, cows and bovine in general are seen as part of a bigger problem. And many people increasingly are getting concerned about animal welfare. Fortunately, we don't have too much of insights in what's happening in the slaughterhouses. Otherwise, as John Lennon said, we would most likely not eat meat anymore anyhow. If we take a look at where agricultural production today is going into, it is 3 billion tons of staple crops which are being produced year after year. So round about half a ton or 400 kilograms of grain per person and year. And if you look at the right-hand side, it is almost half of that which is going into feed. So 46% it was in the year 2018, which are actually not ending up in our stomachs, but which are being fed to animals. And it is only 1/3, so only 1/3 of all grain produced globally, 37%, is directly going to us. And then there is 6% of biofuel, which will ultimately be shrinking in the next decades, because it is the most inefficient use of land that you can have to put it into biofuels. There are much better alternatives. And then there is 11% of industrial uses. This is the larger area of biotechnology, which we will surely see more about in the future. There's been a long history of meat alternatives, and most of us have grown up with vegetarian options, with vegan options. So what is now the big difference if we are talking about insect-based, about novel vegan, as we call it, or about cultured? The big question is, how similar is it actually to the real thing? How similar is it to meat? And if you see the two axes in that matrix, one is about meat similarity. How similar is it ultimately to meat in terms of texture, of taste, and so forth? And the other direction is the y-axis, is the commercial potential. And we see it very immediately correlated. So the more closely you get to what we are accustomed to as meat eaters, or many of us, most of us, the more likely you are likely to have a big commercial potential. The classic vegan and the classic vegetarian, which has been around for decades, I mean, everybody of us knows the soy burger and all that, they never really took off. There was a niche of maybe 5 or 10% of people who would eat that, but now we are seeing novel vegan, which is all the plant-based alternative proteins, and cultured meat coming on stream, and that seems, at least now, it seems to be taken off. And at Carney, we wanted to understand where is it headed. My very personal journey on that was that I used to go to Silicon Valley for the last 10 years, so it was all pre-COVID, obviously. And every time when I was in San Francisco, I went to a restaurant that would sell the Impossible Burger. Impossible is one of the first plant-based burgers. And when I was there 6 years ago and tried it for the first time, it was hard for me to imagine that this would ever become an alternative to real meat. You would need a lot of pickles and ketchup and stuff to like it. But 2 years ago, in 2019, so 4 years later, I tried it and I could not tell a difference anymore. And that for me personally was the time when I said, let's try to understand where this is headed. Will it be something that stays in the niche, like many bio products, for example, organic food, which has stayed in that niche for a long time, or is it likely to take off? Maybe just in terms of differentiation, what are we talking about when we are saying novel vegan, and what do we mean by cultured meat? So novel vegan ultimately is you take a crop from the field and you extract the proteins. And then you bind that, you extrude it, and ultimately you get what you have now with Beyond Meat or Impossible Burger, all the purely plant-based alternatives. It is plant proteins which are somehow made into something and ultimately, as I said, extruded. So isolation, formulation, and ultimately its processing. This is already very much established. It's a low-tech technology, not a lot of issue behind it. So isolation is no problem, formulation no problem, and processing not either. What is now only coming on stream and where we are only seeing the very first steps is cultured meat. So cultured meat ultimately means that you isolate a cell from an animal and then you grow it in more or less of a petri dish. And that is why many people call it Frankenstein meat. It has no real connectivity to any living organism anymore. So you isolate the cell, you proliferate it in an artificial environment, based on some media that feeds it, and ultimately you need to put it into structure. And this third step, that is the biggest challenge we are seeing right now. You need really like a scaffold to attach it to give it structure. But scientists are working on it, and so it's very, very likely that in a couple of years from now we will actually see meat that has a texture, that has fat strains in it. So it is the real thing. The difference is, on the right-hand side, that is meat, only that it was not produced by a living organism, by an animal, but otherwise it has completely the same components, while the other is simply combined proteins from plants. Now, there is discussions, very active discussions around what is it, and the conventional meat producers, they will claim we have 100% pure thing, and the other ones, they are mixing something. And if you look at the ingredient list of an Impossible Burger or of a Beyond Burger, it is very, very long. And perhaps what is most striking is the binders in it. It's something that you would also need in industrial purposes just to bind stuff together. So that is what many people are concerned about, are increasingly concerned about, and this is something you would not have if you venture into real cell-based meat. We took a look at all the various criteria which will ultimately define commercial success from our point of view. And I don't want to go into all of the details here because that would be too long. But just to give a flavor, and we looked at conventional meat, at the novel vegan meat replacements from plants, and ultimately at the cultured meat. And if you only look at the input material, so this input-output ratio, and everybody knows the figures, yeah, you take like 13 kilograms of grain to produce 1 kilogram of beef. Ratios in chicken are much better. There it's only 3-to-1 approximately. In pork it is 6-to-1, but you have huge losses. That is a matter of fact. And this is completely different in the novel vegan meat replacement and cultured meat. In novel vegan, it's like 1.5-to-1 input to output, and in cultured meat, it's even better. If you look at the product features, that is where you have the big differentiation between novel vegan and cultured meat, because, as I said, ultimately, cultured meat will be the real thing, so it cannot be differentiated from classical meat, while novel vegan is, in terms of the texture, in terms of the scent, never will be the real thing. So it will mostly be used for highly processed stuff, which is around about 25% of the market. So if you are talking sausages or burgers, minced meat, wherever you have highly processed components, you cannot tell the difference anyhow, so you can take novel vegan for that. But if you really want to go into the texture, then what you ultimately will need is cultured meat. So in the end, we see that the race will be made by cultured meat, and the first step took place end of last year. We had Eat Just, who in Singapore got regulated the first cell-based meat. It was 1 to 2 years even earlier before most people had expected. It was chicken tissue that ended up in chicken nuggets, but it was a major disruption in the market because actually you can eat cell-based meat, as I said, end of last year. And once you have the regulation in a market like Singapore, it's very likely that you also achieve it in other markets. 2019, that was the big hello. So 2 years ago, when the products came into the market, we had the IPO of Beyond Meat. It got to 10 billion in a couple of days. So now we can discuss, is that justified or not? But it was a signal to the market. There is a potential disruption, and investors ventured into it. And if you look at the very fundamental economics, it kind of makes sense, because you need so much less input to produce a similar output than in conventional farming. And that is what, from our point of view, ultimately will make meat alternatives or protein alternatives win in the market, that it is so much cheaper. It is not reflected in the prices today. So if you buy a Beyond Burger, it will likely be more expensive than meat, but simply from the economics, from what it takes to produce this, it's only a fraction of the cost because it's less input and you don't have to raise an animal, you don't have to take care of it, you don't have to slaughter it. So much less work, very much like in other segments. If you think of milk, you have milk and you have Oatly. It is this oat-based milk. Oatly milk maybe has oat content for 3 or 4 cents per liter, and the rest is water and processing. So it will be much, much cheaper than the alternative production, and that is what makes those win. Now, perhaps to the most interesting perspective on where do we see this all ending up. We are talking about an approximately $1.2 trillion market roundabout as of today. That is the global meat market. 90% of it today are very much conventional, and then you have 10%, which is novel vegan alternatives or vegan alternatives today. And as I said, that will ultimately expand it to some 25%, which is the whole range of processed meats. But the rest, there will be a gap of around about 35%, which will most likely be filled by cultured meat. And don't take that numbers for granted. So if you see me again in 2040 and it's different, don't say, well, you prognosed it to be like this. This is order of magnitude. But the main message is there will be more alternatives than conventional meat. And this is based on a panel of 150 market participants from the very beginning of the value chain. So here we are talking about farm-in producers over the processors down to the retail space. And the retailers, they are pushing this the most because they have the highest benefit. At the beginning of the value chain, if you talk about farming input producers, it's not very attractive to them because think about how many are invested in soy and corn production. They don't want to hear this. It's mostly attractive to the end of the value chain, and they will be driving it, and that is what you can already see in the market. So what will be the main steps? We are expecting that in 2030, alternatives in the area of cell-based will be competitive. I said they entered the market already, but to have true competitiveness, that you will buy a high-quality steak, that is most likely not before the year 2030, and that is why only after that we will see cultured meat taking off. More complex structures can be made in about 15 years from now, and we will see full market impact in 2030. Let's have a short look at how this is being globally distributed. Only very quick perspective on the meat market 20 years out. It will be around about 2 trillion, so an overall growth from 1.2 to 2 trillion. It is a market very largely dominated, as you can see here, by Asia. Asia by far is the biggest meat market, and then we have North America and Europe at around about 350 billion, a little bit less in South America, and Africa will only slowly be coming on stream. And meat alternatives are most important for Asia, because if Asia want to feed their people, and they're very often it's a status object to have alternatives to eating solely vegan, then you will need to enter into that market, and that is why we see cultured very strongly coming on stream in Asia. And in North America, Europe, it will be way less, but a market very much dominated by Asia. And this is simply due to population. Most population of the world is in Asia, and that is the population which is trying to follow up and to come on stream. Where are the most business activities currently? It is still, admittedly so, a startup phenomenon. It's a West Coast US West Coast thing. Obviously, there is all the tech companies, and they are now venturing into those alternatives. But then there is also a big ecosystem around it in Israel and in the Netherlands. So that is, from our point of view, the 3 most important hotspots that you can see globally: West Coast, Israel, and Europe. And it will be an astonishing development. I suppose that we will see new products coming on stream every couple of months, and it will be accelerating. And this ultimately, let me emphasize that again, it's due to the economics. It will be so much cheaper to have protein alternatives than still to go on raising cattle and have all the hassle. Besides all the other components about animal husbandry and us ultimately not wanting to eat animals anymore. Thank you very much, and looking forward to the following discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carsten. When I was listening to you, I had a little flashback. In 2019, I was also in New York. I was also eating the Impossible Burger, and I also had the same feeling as you described. For me, that was a flashback. This is meat. It felt like meat. It tasted like meat. Everything was really interesting about it. So tremendous to see. Maybe that's where we've met before, 2019 in New York. So please take a seat. Thank you very much. Now we have our expert panel coming up, and that's where I would like to introduce Dr. Julia Köhn. She is a founder herself. She's the founder of Peelers, founder and CEO. Julia, you're also the chairwoman of the German Agri-Food Society, so I'll leave the stage in good hands here for you. Warm welcome, and over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Hello, nice to meet you. Please welcome with me on stage Peter Dorfner from the Green Generation Fund. He's an investor, and it's a new fund just opening up in Berlin these days. They focus on early stage startups, sustainable food tech, green tech, and of course new proteins. And he is a specialist in finance and consumer goods. And also welcome on stage, please, Nadine Filko. She's an author and copywriter. She has contributed to magazines like Berlin Valley, T3N, and I think 3 years ago we met on the Farm and Food, and she was then researching for a book called Clean Meat, which was one of the first ones in Germany that was really tackling the issues that Dr. Carsten's just raised. So let me begin, Nadine, with you. You have been speaking of a silent revolution that is coming up. In the talk before, we heard it's not really silent, it's really big, but it's silent in Germany. So what is your perspective on the change that is happening there in the market?
Yeah, I have to admit, in the last 4 years, I've seen a very, very fast change and it's not that silent anymore, but still Germany hasn't got that many startups. We still need investments in the market. But one point in the beginning I want to point out is that we see more and more flexitarians on the market, and I think that's a very, very crucial point. So this change we see, it's kind of silent for the protein market, but we see a growing mass of consumers who want change, who are keen to achieve sustainability, and connected to this, we also see the need for the alternative proteins.
Okay, so when we look at the German market, it's more about more sustainability, not about cheaper prices, right?
I'd say yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
When we now switch to the investor's perspective, Peter, what is your main reason going in this direction of sustainable investment, and therein focusing on new proteins, cultured meat, cell-based meat, whatever you name it? It's a whole bunch of things that are happening out there.
Basically, it's like three main reason why we're going in there. So the first one is, of course, the sustainability aspect. Investing in new protein, investing in plant-based, cell-based innovations has a huge and significant impact on the climate. Meat production is responsible for over 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So with the money that we invest in there, we actually do good on a quick and significant scale.
Mm-hmm.
The second reason is that The market has strongly evolved in the past couple of years. As a team, we have been in the segment for over 5 years now, and what we've seen in innovation popping up, especially in the last 2 years, has really even astonished us and even exceeded our expectations. And also the rate consumers adapt these innovations makes us believe that this market will grow heavily and grow strongly in the coming years. And the last point why we invest now, or why we invest into alternative protein, is that the technologies that have basically evolved in the past months, I would say, or the past 2 years, really have the potential to fulfill, on the one hand side, the sustainability aspect, on the other hand side, the consumer demand, even more strongly than innovation did in the plant-based meat and dairy segment before.
Yeah. Dr. Carsten, you've just pointed out that it's more a pull market. It's coming from the consumer side, and it's a question about sustainability, we learned. It's also a question about prices, and there's a strong pull from Asia and other foreign countries. It's not so much about agriculture. Well, we are supposed to talk about the future of agriculture today. And of course, this has something to do with our nourishing. So what is then the impact of this new market pull, of this revolution coming up for AgTech?
I think the more we get used to alternatives of the conventional food. So, and this is what we're now seeing in the meat area. We are moving away from what we have been used to for centuries. Now we're getting into something completely new. I think we will see that also in other areas of nutrition. So why shouldn't our nutrition not be based on completely alternative feedstocks? What the plant does ultimately is it captures CO2 from the air, it combines it with some nutrients and minerals, and we can do that in alternative ways. So very much like we are seeing now alternative proteins and meat coming on stream, we may see complete alternative food. Take solar foods from Scandinavia. They will claim we take green hydrogen, CO2, and we combine that ultimately into starches, into sugars, into proteins. So what is now beginning in the meat sector can ultimately go into the whole of the food production system, because if you look at what land makes out the sun coming in, it's only converting 1% of the energy coming in into something usable. If you do that via photovoltaics, it can be 15 to 20%. So you have a much higher conversion rate, and that can ultimately be the big revolution in agriculture. We may end up in a situation, and that is obviously more than 20 years out, where we are really driving, where we are feeding on alternatively produced food in all areas, and that is the big connection to agriculture from my point of view. It can be disruptive in all areas. It may sound a bit out, but you can see the startups in that area already. And why not? We are doing it in other areas too. We will be producing sustainable aviation fuel solely based on renewable energy and CO2 captured some way from the air. And if you feed an aircraft or a human, ultimately in principle it's no big difference. It may sound weird, but it's all energy taken in and processed into something which drives us.
Okay.
This is interesting because in a kind of way we already see the change happening everywhere, but I think if we talk about how we can implement it into our system, it's crucial to talk about how can we incorporate the old industry. This is something I'm thinking about for the last years since I touched the issue actually, and I think it's a big part of incorporating it to get the old industry. How do you think can we achieve this?
I think it will be super tough. Like if you look in the energy industry, you have all the stranded assets, oil, oil and gas and coal, and besides you establish green twins. So my answer would be most likely most industries will not be able to transform, but once the old ones will run out, ultimately they will fade away, and beside them you build new twins. Take RWE or E.ON in Germany. They have the old utilities, and then they are setting up novel businesses, and that they are apart because in most areas will most likely not manage to transform, but ones will die and the other ones will build up. Maybe that's a little bit too pessimistic, and I would wish we could see more transformation, but. My impression is that most industries are struggling with building from their inner a new business model.
I definitely agree to Carsten, and I also think that what happened in the alternative protein segment kickstarted like an revolution or an evolution in like many adjacent food and consumer goods categories in the recent past, and is even like accelerating now. Through the success of companies like Beyond Meat and Oatly.
So what we see is that old corporates are investing in those new startups, or is it that they're not interested? So you're just closing a fund. How is the interest of LPs from the old economy of food production in those new topics?
So if we compare what's happening now in food with what happened like in the digital revolution like 10, 20 years ago, it's a way faster adoption, I would say, of the so-called old economy, of new technologies, interest in like changing like the way they manufacture, the way they market, and the way they like source their products, and also like a way more open-mindedness to say into these innovations. A good example is the Beyond Burger, for example. Like one of the first investors in the company was actually not a VC fund, but Tyson Foods, a meat giant. So the understanding that something has to be done, and that basically the system's not sustainable, and in the long run for these old economy businesses to stay relevant, was that they have to adapt to these new innovations and to invest into them, collaborate with them. Good example is also like when coming back to the Beyond Burger, PHW was was a big German meat distributor who quickly went in to distribute the Beyond Burger in Germany. So there's a huge openness to collaborate with these startups, but they are also, compared again to digital revolution, way faster to adapt own innovation. Think about the incredible burger by Nestle. I think they did it within 9 months or so. After success of the Beyond Burger, they had an own product that was pretty much comparable from qualities and from ingredients and from taste to what a startup previously brought out. So I think the understanding in this industry is way bigger than most anticipate or assume. So we definitely see the interest from this.
So the startups are pushing the change, but the industry is adopting it and somehow also using it for their own growth.
And I agree, please don't get me wrong when I'm saying they are having a hard time to adapt. I think they are seeing it, and the strategy departments, they are understanding it, and they are investing. Only if you really want to take a whole company along on this new journey, that will be tough. So you plant something new in, take PHW, they have this branch investing in alternative proteins, but from my point of view, it's being built up side by side with the existing business. And while the one is fading away, the other one is building up. And I don't think you have too much transition. And that is maybe a generational problem. If you have done something in your business life for 20 or 30 years, then you continue for the last 10 years of your business life. And the next generation, they are building up the new business.
I'd also say it's the first step, but we we do see that they have the resources to change their processes. So actually, it's maybe a question of not talking about sustainability, but talking about money. That's crucial, I think, because at the moment we're pushing the issue by saying it's more sustainable, it's better for the world, and we also see the flexitarians growing up. But for the industry, of course, they're also caring about our nature and environment, but I think it's more crucial to say, okay, let's see the market in 20 years, all your consumers will be gone, and there's going to be no money, and I think that's what we have to communicate also. Yeah.
So, do we leave our German farmers behind? So we've talked about PHW. We see changes in Nestle. We see also that other food-producing companies start to invest in new proteins. But what about the basic production of food? Do we also see investors from these areas heading forward change, or are they still staying with their old business models?
It's a tough one to answer. I'd rather think that they are staying with where they currently are, and that basically a new generation of investors is evolving for this segment. I think they're rather following, but who funded like alternative protein in the beginning were actually very often next to like food corporate specialized food VCs came up early.
So there have been early food VCs like Katja's, which was a in-house one. Then we have Atlantic Food Labs, Cherry Ventures. These are the early ones in Germany. Now there's a new generation coming up. I think what you're doing now is also kind of the next level of investing in the future of food. So what is the difference between those early ones and those that are now stepping in this area of investment?
I'd say that the approach is a more holistic one. I think like in the beginning it was more an opportunity many investors saw, and of course sustainability was a big aspect, but also like the market by itself.
It's exactly what Peter said. Also the startups are saying we need public money, we need somebody who is really taking the risk, because this is a new area of investment that is not that easy to calculate for normal VC. So this public money that we need, how do we need it? Do we need more research grants, or do we need more exist stipendium? I don't think so, because we have seen also in this research that most of these startups, they got exactly that. The classic is they got an exist, then they got a second level of research fellowship, and then they made a seed investment, a seed round with 200 to 400K, which is like nothing. And then they are struggling, all of them, or most of them are struggling to get significant amounts, so 1 million, 2 million, or even more. And at this stage, between seed and Series A, is the sweet spot that we found where we need the public money. Is that something you can agree on, or what would you add to that?
I think it's a bit more early. I think as soon as basically there is some traction, there are investors who will be interested, and especially like Series A money or late seed money is currently, I think, pretty much available for new protein innovation in the market. What we saw is like valuations in the space, they tripled over in the past 18 months.
Last 18 months, yeah.
Right. So I think what's important for these startups is that they know where they want to go. With what they're doing.
Again, I just
that they know where they want to go with what they're doing. So very often, like there are many like players in the field having like the same solution, or offering the same solution, and it's maybe not always interesting for like the VC ecosystem to back like many different doing the same, and rather focusing like on one or two stellars and combining the stellar brands or stellar innovations in the space and combining the money there. So what founders might also think about is there a chance from a business like to grow it like from the public money I get in an organic way. I mean, we had it yesterday on the stage. We've talked about zebras as a kind of business model in the space. I mean, these companies, they grow like slower and grow like more organically, and especially the new food space offers like plenty of opportunities for those companies. There will be these stellar Beyond Meat, Oatly, Impossible brands in the market who reach global scale, but there will be also like many localized regional solutions that also have the customer base and the right to exist in the market and the necessity to exist in the market. Yet they might never get actually like huge amounts of funding. So entrepreneurs might have to consider this in the space as well.
Dr. Carsten, what would you think? From a more corporate perspective, you're responsible for sustainability strategies of like the big companies we see in this country and abroad. Is this enough that there are zebras and a few startups, few moonshot startups coming up, or do we need more focus on this area for the corporates later on to step in this?
Yes. So what I would really much like to see is more of an appreciation for the farming segment, and we are talking about agriculture here. If you take a look at how little the value is that is created by the farmers and all by the ag input industries compared to what you pay at the retail level, it is I find it completely disturbing.
Yeah.
When my mother, so I'm 52 now, when she sent me to buy rolls 45 years ago, she would give me exact change, and for less than a Deutschmark, I could buy 10 rolls back at the time. When I buy one roll today, it's 40 or 50 cent, and if you then simply imagine how little wheat or whatever is going into that, so it's only 10% of what we pay in a supermarket that ultimately ends up with a farmer. And I think this lack of appreciation and that so much more is added in the additional chains of the value, steps of the value chain, that is a problem. I think we need to push money into where the value is created and where you have the footprint, the social and the ecological footprint. If we don't change that, then startups will always focus on trying to do the distribution and what have you. I mean, how is it possible that somebody who is carrying around pizzas on a bicycle delivery hero is valued at 30 billion? This is completely insane, while we lack the money at where the work is done. So I think that more of an appreciation, knowing what's in it, and if it's produced sustainable, to be willing to pay up a little. And it's not much what the farmer needs to have. If you give a German farmer 20% more, then
they're pretty happy with everything.
Then they're pretty happy. But I don't want to pay 20% more in a supermarket or 30%. Yeah, we somehow need to find a way that the money gets to where the work is done.
Well, when we look at those startups that currently get the huge amounts of investment, then they are exactly on the other side of the supply chain. So how do we get, like, final wish, we have 5 minutes left for each of you. How do we get from investment running in this highly processed food, which is definitely much better than the stuff that we had 5 years ago, how can we use this pull from the market side in order to push better innovation on the fields and more appreciation for the people who do the work? So what would be your wish?
My wish would really be traceability and a small set of labels, because everybody gets confused on a higher level if you want to do good today, but traceability and some established norms and standards for knowing which products really do good for the producers.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'd also say it's transparency, definitely. So you know what you pay for which ingredients and who gets what, but also what's the impact on the environment. But also, I think it's such a difficult question. If we had the answer now, we would be way far. But Yeah, the consumers. I don't think that we can expect too much from the consumers. I think it's the system behind this we have to change, and that's a very, very crucial part of it. Always think, okay, yes, of course I want to pay more to the farmer, but please give me the system that allows this. And because although we see in the next generation growing and they want to change things, they still aren't the leaders. So there's so much to do still. So yeah, I think it's still communication, getting together, talking. There's so many facts.
What would be about a regulation, like a true cost pricing, something that forces us to incorporate the carbon costs of the food production? Then maybe we would have, even today, already the financial breakthrough that the cultured meat or the plant-based meat is much cheaper than that coming from the old production, mass animal production.
Definitely
side.
something that would work, I think. Yeah.
So this is regulation then.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
Stop smoking. Stop eating shit.
You don't need the pictures or something like that, like with cigarettes, for example. But I think it's enough if you're in a supermarket and you see, okay, this costs maybe 10 cents more. Yeah, okay, I'll take that because it's good for your mind, it's good for your conscience. So you're just going to pay it, and you don't have to do much about it, you know. Yeah.
But can't consumers already do that? So there is, for example, if we go at BRW, if we have Wiesenhof, there's Privatgeflügel, which is already at a very high level of production, but people don't buy it. They still buy the cheaper stuff, which is exactly placed right beside this better produced chicken.
Yeah, my wish would be like to support more localization, because having it like local means a bit like food security for the people in a specific area, and food security might not be a topic like for the, at least like in developed countries, for the few coming years, but for the decades to come. And I mean, it's an exciting industry, but food is still like the most basic need a human being has, and we should try to secure this to as many people as possible in a sustainable way as it can be, and to come back also to your points, to appreciate those people who allow this level of food security, these local farmers, by like paying them fairly and allowing them to exist for generations to come.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much, all three of you. It was a pleasure to discuss this very important issue, as it's not only about the next fancy moonshot startup, but it's really about how we take care of our environment and how we produce in the regions, at the local level, what is happening at the farms and how they change. And what I learned is that we have a very strong pull from the market side, but where we really need support is more from the production side. And I'm looking forward what is going to happen in the next 2 years, because the last 2 years really thrilled me, as it was really a change happening in the people's minds. And hopefully we see each other in the next 2 years somewhere and discuss how those moonshot startups also developed on the more agricultural production side of the value chain. Thank you very much, and
thank you.
Thank you so much for the panel. If you want, you can leave the stage. For me, it actually made me thinking, when we are talking about food, this is something we do every day, and I personally love to do good with things I do casually, because I just do it anyway. And our next panel, or actually keynote, will also be about a topic with one thing we do every day, I guess. Actually, we look stuff up in the internet, and there are different options to do so, but there is one option, and this is you can look something up and you can plant trees with it. And most of you are probably familiar with Ecosia, and I'm really excited to welcome CEO and founder Christoph Kroll on stage. He will talk about the topic how regenerative companies can actually help solve the climate crisis. Even though maybe you're not Ecosia, you have another idea. Christoph, welcome on stage.
Thank you very much. All right. Yeah, for those of you who don't know Ecosia yet, shame on you. But no, just to explain what Ecosia is. Ecosia is a search engine. It works like any other search engine. You type in your search terms, and when you hit the search button, you see search results. What we also do, like any other search company, we display advertisements right next to the search results, and when you click on some of those ads, then we make money. So until here, everything is the same, like with our competitors. The big difference, though, is that we use that money to finance tree planting projects around the world. And why are we doing this? Because by planting trees, you can really massively transform everything. So here you see a project in Burkina Faso, and as you see, previously you had completely degraded land where it was impossible for people to make a living, where there was not much biodiversity. And by introducing trees, we not only help people generate income for themselves because they're being paid for the tree planting, or because they can harvest money from the tree, they can generate money from harvesting products from the trees. The soil is getting better. That means they can do agriculture or grazing. The water cycle is being stabilized, so they have less floods and droughts. It's amazing for biodiversity. And last but not least, it really gives people hope. So we often say that we're actually not planting trees, we're planting hope, and we're planting a future. And this is really the amazing power of trees. And one thing that is, of course, also very relevant when you talk about trees is their potential to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. So on this map, you see all the green areas. Those are areas where trees can and should be planted without losing any production value to agriculture. So we have capacity for around 1 trillion trees, so that's 1,000 billion, because we're not using that number very often, a lot. And if we plant those trees, we can actually absorb hundreds of gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere. And that is really, really significant. I think tree planting alone, of course, can't solve climate change, but I'm pretty sure that without planting kind of those orders of magnitudes of trees, we won't be able to solve climate change. So calculated that with each search that you're doing on Ecosia, you're actually absorbing around 1 kilogram of CO2 from the atmosphere. And I'm personally doing dozens of searches every day. That means thousands of searches every year. That means a few tons of CO2 removed from the atmosphere just because you change your search engine. So the average CO2 footprint in Germany is around 11 tons. So that is really significant. With such a small, just takes a few seconds changing a search engine, and that's really already a big contribution. But there are other things that we're doing that I briefly want to talk about. One of them is that we want to invest more and more in technology that actually helps people make greener choices. So let's say you want to go from Berlin to Frankfurt and you want to buy a plane ticket. There are still people doing that, I heard. And you type that into Ecosia, then we could tell people that you could take the train instead. So those kind of recommendations, or let's say you want to buy a new washing machine, we could highlight the washing machine that has a lower footprint or has been produced in better ways. So that is the kind of additional features that you will soon get at Ecosia. As I said, we're a small team, so it takes a little bit of time to actually develop those things, but this is what we're really excited about. Another thing that we're doing differently than a lot of other companies is when you look at where the energy is coming from that we're using. And a lot of the big tech companies at the moment, they pride themselves in being 100% renewable. And we, of course, also use renewable energy. We've invested more than 10 million euros in the last few years in building up mostly photovoltaic systems across Germany. And the big difference, though, between us and many of those companies is that we decided we don't want to stop at 100%. There's no reason to stop at 100%. If you're at 100%, maybe then you stop being part of the problem, but you haven't actually, you're not contributing to a solution, really. So what we want to do is to basically break that glass ceiling and get every company, especially the big ones also, to really think about 200% renewable, 300%. There's no reason not to do that. And we actually launched, so if you're working at a company that might be interested in doing that, we launched a climate action energy fund where other companies who are similar to Ecosia, who maybe want to kind of be more active, can also participate in that and also just invest more money into renewable energy so that they're not only CO2 neutral or 100% renewable energy, but actually go beyond that. So if you're interested in that, feel free to reach out. We're happy to work with companies who want to be more ambitious in that area. Another example that I wanted to give, because it's something that's probably happening at all companies. I mean, tree planting is maybe special. That's something that we're doing, but I assume everybody of you is eating, and probably everybody who works at the company, there probably is some kind of company lunches, breakfast, or something like that. So we at Ecosia, we have a weekly lunch for our team members, and we not only made sure that all of the food is organic, but most of it is also vegetarian, and actually almost everything actually vegan. But we didn't want to stop there. So that's something that a lot of companies are also now doing, but we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to have actually a positive impact. So we're partnering with a farm that is 40 kilometers outside of Berlin, and there we're producing our food now. And we're also, this food is actually being taken to our office by bike, so by train and bike, not only bike. So it's really, the footprint of the food is very, very low, but we're also having a positive impact because we're supporting regenerative farming. And regenerative farming is really one of the big levers that we have to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. I think you've heard a lot about that in the previous discussions and panels. But this is something that every company can do. Why? I mean, the food is delicious, it's much more nutritious, it's not really more expensive, it gets the people really excited. We have people going to that farm for volunteering, for example, so that's something that a lot of companies can do. And it's one of the small things that we're doing, but please feel free to copy. Then another thing that we did, you might have heard about this, we tried to buy the forest of Hambach a few years ago. That is, I mean, now the forest is basically protected, so everything's fine, but we made RWE, the energy company that wanted to cut down the forest, and offered to buy the forest away from them. And yeah, they of course didn't accept, but what happened was that suddenly a lot of media outlets talked about that and basically raised that question: if in the area of climate change you're still allowed to cut down an ancient forest because you want to produce more coal, that just doesn't make sense. And basically the media put even more pressure on RWE to make sure that this forest will stay standing. And I'm bringing up that example because for us that was, I think, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that was the moment where we realized that we, as a company, we have the possibility and also the responsibility to be activists. So climate change is so important that we can't leave those kind of things just to Greenpeace. This needs to be done by everyone, and I think every company can be much, much more activist and actually speak up if things are wrong. And yeah, so also support employees if they want to take action. So this is really, for us, this really also changed our perception. And we've done a lot of similar things, also contributing to the current election, for example, where we want to have just use our voice and our platform to basically get system change and also speak up if things that shouldn't be are currently happening. Yeah, so overall, I made a little challenge to myself that whenever I hear the word sustainability, that I want to trigger a little bit of a process where I think, is this really enough? So we often, even at Ecosia in our communication or in many discussions I join, people often talk about being sustainable, being carbon neutral, being reducing the footprint and so on. And that for me just isn't the right mindset anymore. We could have done that a few decades ago, but right now we really have to change our mindset and really think not what is the minimum that we can do or what do we have to do to be neutral. I think we can't afford that anymore, but we actually have to think what is the maximum positive that we can do. And especially in our sector, there are a lot of companies who have billions of dollars lying around on their bank accounts, and they could be doing so much more with that money. They could finance the entire energy transition. They could finance also the transition to regenerative agriculture. So I'm not talking about donations, but really just profitable investments that can be done to speed up this transition that we need from a destructive society to a regenerative society. And yeah, I would like to invite you to also kind of change that mindset. So I don't know, maybe some of you are working in sustainability departments. Maybe you want to change the name of that, or even want to change your title and turn it into a regeneration department. So what can you do to really have a massive positive impact on this planet? This is, I think, the mindset that we need. Otherwise, we won't be able to prevent a climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Christian, I have a comment and I have a question for you, a really pressing question. First of all, congrats. I mean, yesterday we talked a lot about impact measurement, and one thing that you do really great at Ecosia is your impact reporting. Every month on social media, it's very clear, very transparent, and very much on point. So big thumbs up for this one. I find this every month like, wow, these are your figures, and this is really an example how you do it in an easy way. I have a pressing question. You mentioned the 1% market share and that 98% that belongs to that other company. What's your master plan to get Ecosia to 10%, 20%, 30%? Do you have a secret master plan?
Yeah, I go to conferences every day. No, I mean, in the end, it's we can't compete with those companies when it comes to marketing budget, or I mean, they even control many of the platforms that we would have to do marketing on. So I think in the end we rely on people to just tell their friends. So I think we hopefully have a better story to tell than many of those companies. I mean, I could also get into privacy or paying taxes or just being nice companies. All of those things, I think we are the better alternative there. And in the end, the customer, that means you of all, need to make that choice to change your search engine. It's not much effort.
So you know what you're going to do now.
And tell your friends and all that. We have actually a lot of people that come to us say, I don't know, somehow Ecosia appeared on my screen, on my computer. I don't know what happened. And actually, they then realize that often their kids are changing the search engines of the parents. So that is also our secret.
That's the big hope then for Ecosia.
Yeah, so a lot of, I mean, especially that young generation, they are much more affected by climate change. So they are even more eager to do things, and switching to Ecosia is one of the few things that they can actually do. And then they do it not only for themselves, but for the entire family, or even in the classrooms and so on.
Super interesting to really learn that it's really a lot about marketing and the budgets behind this. I mean, that's something we've not been talking much about this. Christian, thanks a lot for this insightful presentation. One round of applause for you.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you, Christian.
Let's give them a spontaneous task over lunch break. Please use Ecosia, find something about...
And plant a tree.
And plant a tree. No, we're coming up with a lunch break now, so we're going to stop here. We're going to see you back at 1 p.m.
Exactly, and then we're going to start with our new innovation area. It's going to be future mobility and cities, and we're going to talk about very exciting topics, how we can, for instance, reorganize infrastructure within big cities, or we will maybe reveal the secret if we are able to go by air taxi through Berlin or other metropolitan areas soon or later. We will find out. So please make sure to be back at 1 p.m. and hopefully enjoy your lunch break.
Yes.
Get some fresh air. And use Ecosia.